Welcome to your deep dive. We've got a whole stack of sources here, and they're all about the Bene Gesserit from the Dune universe.
Really dives deep into how this powerful sisterhood came to be.
Yeah, from their mysterious beginnings all the way to, how they pull strings across the galaxy.
On the mind-boggling strategy.
Exactly. And it's really interesting because their origin story, if you really look into it.
It all goes back to the Butlerian Jihad.
Oh, absolutely.
That galaxy-wide war against thinking machines. It's like, I don't think a lot of people realize
It's not just some historical footnote, right?
Totally shaped the Bene Gesserit's entire worldview.
So essentially, humanity was forced to rediscover its potential, right? After purging itself of AI. Does that mean
it's like a reset button, almost.
Did that create a power vacuum that the Bene Gesserit just stepped right into?
Yeah, you could say that. But what's interesting is they didn't rely on technology or just brute force.
Right.
They focused on honing human abilities, mental discipline, emotional control, things that machines just couldn't replicate.
And this is where figures like Aurelia Serenus come in, right?
The OG Reverend Mother.
The first one.
Yeah.
But what I think is so striking is this belief that women
have this unique role,
almost guiding humanity's future.
It's like baked into their philosophy.
That's at their very core, right?
Oh, absolutely. And this is where we start to see the seeds of their, long game being planted. They were never going for outright power.
Right. At least not right away.
At least not initially.
So how did they navigate those early days? I mean, you got to think, a group of women with these seemingly supernatural abilities.
That raised some eyebrows.
To say the least.
Distrust was everywhere, absolutely.
Right.
But the Bene Gesserit, they were masters of, pragmatism. They just knew how to resolve conflicts.
Right.
Offer counsel, make themselves indispensable to those in power.
It's like they made themselves so valuable they couldn't be ignored, right? So it's almost like they strategically position themselves as these valuable advisors.
Public face.
Even while behind the scenes.
Working their own agenda.
They're working on something else entirely.
It's a classic two-pronged approach.
Yeah.
Publicly, they're diplomats, peacemakers, advisors, but beneath the surface,
they're expanding their influence
through the asentamientos educativos.
Those secretive training grounds.
They're hidden academies.
Tell me more about those settlements. What kind of skills were they honing in these, hidden places?
So you've got a blend of mental discipline, physical combat training.
Right.
And very importantly, political strategy. This is their molding ground for future Bene Gesserit.
So this is where they laid the groundwork for infiltrating the Landsraad.
Oh, for sure.
Which leads us to their most famous tactic.
Strategic marriage.
Oh, yeah. Before we jump to that, though, you mentioned something earlier.
I did.
About, strategic alliances.
Oh, right.
And how the Bene Gesserit weren't shy about partnering up.
Even if it seemed to contradict their philosophy.
This spacing guild.
Yep.
Let's hold on that for a second. Let's unpack this marriage strategy first, because this is not just about...
Not just love and family.
No.
This is about placing these highly trained women, they call them adepts,
in the most powerful families in the Landsraad.
Exactly. And these women, they weren't just wives. They were agents of influence.
It's almost like they were subtly guiding their husbands.
And, more importantly,
their children.
It's
really shaping the future.
Generations at a time.
One generation at a time. And this whole breeding program, this wasn't just about political power, was it?
You're catching on? Their ultimate ambition, it was all about the Kwisatz Haderach.
Right.
A male Bene Gesserit with access to both male and female ancestral memories. Gave him almost prescient abilities.
The super being they spent generations trying to create.
That's the one.
And so this is where, all those meticulous bloodline records come into play. The arranged marriages.
Each marriage was like a calculated move to achieve the genetic diversity they needed.
For the Kwisatz Haderach.
For the Kwisatz Haderach. But it raises a good question, though, If their goal was this male super being, why focus on training women?
Yeah, why? I mean, it seems a little counterintuitive.
It does, doesn't it?
Do the sources offer any insights on that?
So there are a couple of theories. One is that women are just more in tune with their emotions.
Oh, okay.
And thus more capable of the mental discipline needed. But it also speaks to their understanding of power dynamics.
So they knew that true influence, like it often worked from the shadows, and historically women were often positioned in those roles.
Exactly.
They were playing the long game.
Long game.
But they didn't limit themselves to just, bloodlines and political structures.
They knew about belief, the power of belief.
Yeah, this is where the missionaria protectiva comes in.
Planting myths and prophecies across the galaxy.
So by the time the Bene Gesserit arrived on a planet,
they were already fulfilling prophecies that had been circulating for generations.
So they were already revered.
They were set up.
It's brilliant.
Yeah, in a Machiavellian sense.
But it also makes me wonder, were there any Bene Gesserit who saw this, as ethically problematic?
That's a great question.
All this manipulation.
We can maybe discuss that in another deep dive. Perhaps focus on the ethics of the Bene Gesserit.
Yeah.
But for now, let's get back to their rise to power.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, after centuries of this, intricate web spinning, the Bene Gesserits were a force.
I mean, their influence stretched across politics, religion, commerce.
They were everywhere.
Even education.
They understood that true power, it lies in shaping the very fabric of society.
But they didn't do it alone, did they?
They had help.
They formed alliance, like with the Mentats, right? The human computers.
Those Mentats were key, yeah. I mean, their approaches to, honing human potential, they differed a bit.
Sure.
But they shared common ground.
It's all about pragmatism.
Totally.
Mm-hmm.
And it shows how the Bene Gesserit, how they navigated this complex political landscape.
It's fascinating. It's like a case study in how to wield power without actually holding, the highest office.
Exactly.
Which leads to another question. How did they maintain unity in their own ranks for so long? I mean, come on, we're talking centuries.
That's where things get really interesting. Even a sisterhood dedicated to control can't escape the complexities of human nature.
That's for sure.
Yeah, those internal dynamics, it's a whole other layer, isn't it?
I mean, you got to think, any group that powerful, especially operating in the shadows, there's bound to be some, internal friction.
Oh, for sure.
And the Bene Gesserits were no exception.
No exception.
So let's unpack some of that tension. Where did the cracks start to show in this, seemingly unified sisterhood?
Well, one major pressure point, not surprisingly, was the
Kwisatz Haderach breeding program.
That's the one. I mean, the centuries of planning, manipulating bloodlines, it's going to create some disagreements.
Right. You'd think everyone would be on the same page, striving for this,
This super being.
Yeah. So where did the conflict arise?
Well, while all the Bene Gesserit, they agreed on the ultimate goal.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't always agree on, the methods.
I see.
Some factions, they advocated for a more, proactive, even ruthless approach to, manipulating those bloodlines.
So a clash between those patient long-term strategists and those who are a little more willing to take risks for potentially faster results.
Exactly. And you remember those strategic marriages we talked about?
Oh, yeah.
Imagine the debates when deciding which adept
to pair with a powerful duke.
Or a baron.
High stakes for sure.
So was it more important to stick to the breeding program even if the chosen adept wasn't so politically savvy?
Mm.
Or did they prioritize immediate influence at the cost of, a slight genetic detour?
Those were the dilemmas that fueled internal power struggles.
That makes sense.
And one incident that really exemplifies this whole tension
is Lady Jessica.
Oh, yeah. Jessica, mother of Paul Atreides, her defiance of orders is legendary.
Legendary, yeah.
Did the sources offer any new insights into her motivations? Why'd she do it?
Yeah, they suggest this really complex interplay of personal feelings and strategic calculations too.
She was supposed to bear a daughter, right? A pawn in a larger game.
Yeah.
But she chose to have a son, Paul. Paul, a choice rooted in love, for Duke Leto, but also this conviction that Paul, not a, hypothetical daughter, that he was the true Kwisatz Haderach.
It really makes you wonder, did any Bene Gesserit foresee this possibility of individual choice, trumping their grand design?
Yeah, it's almost like Jessica, through her defiance, she exposed this blind spot in their thinking.
That they couldn't control everything.
The unpredictability of human emotions.
Human emotions, yeah.
Free will.
Yeah.
And her defiance had major repercussions, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Didn't it throw their whole plan into disarray?
It sent shockwaves through the sisterhood, challenged their authority.
It led to the rise of Paul Atreides,
who ultimately, reshaped the political landscape.
Disrupted everything.
Everything. It's almost poetic, isn't it?
It is.
They spent generations trying to control the future.
Yeah.
And in doing so, they might have inadvertently created the very force that would dismantle their control.
The very thing they were trying to prevent.
Exactly.
And Jessica's defiance, I mean, that wasn't an isolated incident. Right. You were talking earlier about how the Bene Gesserit operated through this decentralized network.
Schools, chapters.
Yeah, I mean, that structure, while super effective for infiltration, I'm sure it also created opportunities for, like, different interpretations of their agenda.
Right. So, and put simply, different schools and chapters, they developed their own priorities. Some emphasized like political maneuvering. Others, they were all about the breeding program. Still others were more focused on the religious manipulation.
So even within this, like, sisterhood,
you got factions,
competing interests, goals, how did they manage to hold it all together?
Well, a few things. Despite their disagreements, they shared core beliefs, the importance of human potential, the need for control.
That long-term vision of guiding humanity.
Guiding humanity.
Yeah.
So a shared ideology, even if they disagreed on, like, the specifics of how to get there.
Right.
And their rigorous training, that was huge. Every Bene Gesserit, no matter their focus,
underwent intense mental and physical conditioning.
Intense. It forged a bond and instilled discipline.
It was a shared experience, like shaping their worldview, creating a sense of belonging.
That's belonging, yeah. And their history, their traditions, that played a role too.
Of course.
They had rituals, ceremonies, a whole mythology.
Reinforced their identity, their purpose.
Reinforced it all.
So even while they were, like, vying for power within their ranks, they still saw themselves as part of something larger or older, right?
That's right.
But how did a group so skilled at manipulating others handle their own internal conflicts?
Well, their methods for resolving disputes, they were often as subtle and intricate as their strategies for manipulating the outside world.
I bet. Like, give me an example. Did they have their own version of, like, galactic mediation?
So they had truthsayers, Bene Gesserit, who were trained to, like, detect lies and uncover hidden motives. They were often called upon to mediate disputes.
To make sure everyone was being honest.
At least on the surface.
Like an internal affairs division, but with mind reading. That's so interesting. What else? What other methods did they use?
Well, they also implemented something called contests of will.
Contests of will? What's that?
Essentially ritualized power struggles.
Between individual Bene Gesserit.
Or even entire factions. So instead of open warfare.
They had these, like, formalized duels. What did those look like? Were they, like, psychic battles? Political maneuvering?
It depended. Some were purely mental.
Tests of
willpower. Others involved, political strategizing, subtle sabotage, even physical challenges. Wow. It was a way to, channel ambition and civil scores within this, like, structured framework.
So it wasn't just chaos.
Not at all.
It certainly adds a new dimension to the image of the Bene Gesserit, as these serene, all-knowing figures.
It shows they were human, too.
They had their own problems.
It really underscores that even the most disciplined, the most controlled organizations, they're still made up of individuals
with their own
ambitions and rivalries.
That's for sure. But despite all this tension, they managed to achieve, like, incredible unity.
Influence.
It makes their eventual dominance, like, even more impressive.
It speaks to their resilience, their ability to balance individual ambition with the needs of the sisterhood as a whole.
It's a delicate balance.
Delicate, for sure. But this whole focus on control, on manipulation, it wasn't without its downsides, There were times when it backfired.
This reminds me of something you said earlier about the Bene Gesserit having blind spots. You were saying, about the Bene Gesserit having these blind spots. Oh, right.
Like, could those blind spots have, contributed to their downfall?
Well, they definitely played a part. For all their planning, all their foresight.
You could see everything.
There were some things they just didn't anticipate. And maybe their biggest blind spot
was their arrogance.
Their arrogance, it's almost ironic.
It is kind of ironic.
They believed so strongly in their ability to control things, to manipulate people.
It blinded them.
Blinded them to certain possibilities. They were so focused on shaping the future, imposing order, that they underestimated the chaotic nature of, well, everything, the universe.
Right.
They didn't fully grasp the power of individual choice, of free will.
Which, brings us back to Lady Jessica and Paul Atreides.
Bring it back to them.
They weren't just outliers. They were, like, proof that even the most carefully constructed plans
can be disrupted
by human emotion. Choices, defiant choices.
Yeah, Paul's rise, fueled by his unique abilities in the Freeman Rebellion.
Completely overturned the Bene Gesserit's carefully constructed order. It really makes you think, their quest for control, maybe inadvertently led to the very circumstances that undermined it.
Like they created their own worst enemy.
In a way, yeah.
Did any Bene Gesserit foresee that possibility? Did they ever, like, express doubts about their methods? I mean, manipulating entire bloodlines?
It's a great question. And honestly, the sources we have, they don't really give us much insight into that.
Really?
But it is something to think about, you know. Where are their dissenting voices, Bene Gesserit, who question the ethical implications of their actions?
It seems like there would have to be, right? I mean, even with noble intentions.
Even with the best of intentions.
It's a pursuit of power, especially on that scale. It's bound to lead to, you know, some morally ambiguous choices.
You've hit a really important point, the Bene Gesserit story.
It's a cautionary tale.
Cautionary tale. It reminds us that even the most brilliant minds, they can fall prey to their own, you know, biases.
Blind spots.
Yeah. And that even those who seem to have it all figured out, they're still grappling with the complexities of human nature, with that, you know, eternal struggle between order and chaos.
That's a great way to put it. The Bene Gesserit, for all their power and influence.
They were human.
They
wanted control. They wanted to shape the future.
But they couldn't escape the unpredictability
of the universe.
Of their own species. It's a really fascinating study. Ambition, manipulation, and just the unintended consequences of, you know, seemingly well-intentioned plans.
It really makes you think.
What stands out to you the most about their legacy?
I think the duality of their nature, you know. They were capable of such wisdom, but also such manipulation, of nurturing, of exploiting, and often, like, at the same time.
Yeah.
It's a reflection on the nature of power itself.
It is. And they really challenge us, don't they?
They do.
To consider that delicate balance.
Individual choice.
Collective good. You know, those ethical dilemmas that come up when you try to shape the destiny of others.
It makes you wonder.
Could a group like the Bene Gesserit exist in our world? Something to ponder, you know?
As you continue exploring the Dune universe,